A farmer found a wild chestnut mare chained to the earth beside her newborn foal. But what happened next made an entire town believe in mercy again. The story begins on a dry New Mexico morning when Cal Bennett, an aging widower with nothing left to fight for, stumbles upon a sight that stops his heart cold. A mare bound to a stake in the burning dust, her foal too weak to stand. He could have walked away, but that single choice, to kneel beside suffering instead of passing it by, sets off a chain of events that will test his courage, his faith, and the fragile hope buried under years of silence. The morning sun had only begun to spill over the low mesas of northern New Mexico, yet the air already shimmered with heat. Cal Bennett walked along the far edge of his chili field, boots sinking into the cracked red soil. His hat brim cast a shadow over eyes gone gray from too many dry seasons. The irrigation pipes rattled softly, an old system he patched with duct tape and faith. On the horizon, a flock of black crows wheeled in slow circles above the sagebrush hills. Cal frowned. Crows meant death, or something close to it. He climbed the fence line, one post at a time, until the smell of rust and dry sage grew thick. A section of barbed wire had been torn open, as if something wild had crashed through in panic. The wind carried a faint metallic scent, and somewhere nearby came a sound. Not loud, but desperate. The short, uneven rasp of a creature breathing against pain. Cal froze. Just beyond a patch of rabbit brush, he saw her. A mare. Chestnut red like fire, dampened by dust. Her neck wound tight with a length of chain sunk deep into the earth. The metal had rubbed her raw. Blood and rust mingled into one dark stain. At her side lay a newborn foal, still damp, its small chest heaving weakly. For a moment, time emptied itself. Cal felt the pulse in his neck hammer as he looked at the scene, the mare trembling, the foal's small legs folded like paper, the cruel glint of the chain in the sun. He stepped closer, whispering softly as if approaching a ghost. "Easy now, girl," he said. His voice came out rough, the same voice he used on dying crops and broken engines. The mare lifted her head, eyes wide, nostrils flaring. She didn't lunge or kick. She just stared at him, tired, watching, waiting. Cal crouched, studying the knot of the chain, the way it coiled around a cedar stake driven deep into the soil. Whoever had done this hadn't planned to return. The foal gave a faint, pitiful whimper. Cal's throat tightened, the heat pressed against his back, and the smell of iron filled his lungs. He reached for the water bottle clipped to his belt, half empty. It didn't matter. He poured what little remained into his dusty hat and inched it forward. The mare hesitated, nostrils flaring again. Then she lowered her head and drank. The sound of her swallowing, slow, hoarse, grateful, made Cal's eyes sting. When the last drop was gone, she nudged the brim gently back toward him, as if to say, "That's enough." He sat there for a long minute, hat still in hand, the sun glaring hard on his shoulders. In the distance, thunder rolled faintly, a promise of the monsoon not yet come. Cal exhaled slowly. He hadn't prayed since the night his wife died in the snowstorm last year, but something inside him whispered now. Not a prayer exactly, but a pull. The foal stirred again, pressing against its mother's side. Cal looked from the mare to the hills, to the empty highway beyond, then back at her. "You didn't choose this," he said quietly. "None of us do." He rose, dusted his jeans, and took a slow step backward. The mare followed him with her gaze, unblinking. He knew he should go. Call animal control, maybe the Bureau of Land Management. But the thought of leaving her like that burned in his chest. The foal's faint cry cut through the silence once more, thin as a breath. Cal turned toward his truck, but after 2 steps, he stopped. The wind shifted, carrying the dry scent of rain and the far-off hum of thunder again. He looked back at the chestnut mare chained to the earth, the small foal clinging to her flank. Something in that sight, raw, helpless, stubbornly alive, grabbed hold of him and wouldn't let go. He muttered under his breath, "I'll be back." And he meant it. When he climbed into the truck, the crows had scattered. The sun climbed higher, laying gold light across the valley. In the rearview mirror, he caught one last glimpse of the mare, her coat gleaming copper under the sky, the foal tucked close. On the drive home, Cal's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than he realized. The old Ford rattled down the dirt road, kicking up a trail of red dust that curled into the air behind him. Somewhere inside, something long dormant stirred. The ache of duty, the echo of care he thought he'd buried with his wife. By the time he reached the gate to his farm, the words had already formed in his mind, heavy and certain. He whispered them to the wind, as if to seal a promise. "I can't just walk away." And when the sun dipped low behind the mesas, Cal Bennett, farmer, widower, man of few words, was already planning how to return before the next nightfall. By late afternoon, the heat had settled over the Bennett place like a heavy quilt, stitched with the drone of cicadas and the slow tick of the kitchen clock. Cal parked the truck beside the cinder-block shed and stood there with the engine ticking down, listening to the silence that comes after a decision. Dust slid off the fenders in soft curtains. He wiped his palms on his jeans, as if the choice he had made out in the hills were a stain he couldn't quite wash away. Inside, the house kept the days cool like a secret. The framed photo of his wife, Lainey, stood on the windowsill where the light always found it. Her hair loose, her mouth laughing at something he'd said. And already, forgotten. Cal paused in the doorway the way he always did, long enough for the ache to arrive, then passed through. He set his hat on the chair and turned the faucet until the pipes shuddered and gave him a thin stream. He drank from his cupped hands. The water was metallic with the old well, but it steadied him. On the table lay the day's mail, a trifold from the bank with a polite threat written in numbers. A bright flyer about solar panels promising to cut bills in half. A generic note about home insurance renewal, and a postcard for mobile veterinary services with a phone number scrawled in ink. The trumpet of a far-off train threaded the quiet like a line of thought. Maya came in without a sound, a shadow cut loose from the porch, 14, all elbows and bravery she didn't show, with a sketchbook pressed tight to her ribs. She moved around the kitchen like someone visiting a museum of a life they once knew. "You didn't eat lunch," she said, not accusing, just arranging fact in the air between them. Cal nodded. Words felt heavy today. He reached into the bread box, laid out 2 slices, and found the jar of peach preserves Lainey had canned the summer before the storm. Maya watched his hands. Big, careful, stubborn, spread sweetness to the edges like they were drawing a boundary. He cleared his throat. Ran the fence line. Found trouble out by the north slope. He told her the rest in pieces, the way he fixed things. One bolt, one washer, one breath at a time. The gap in the barbed wire, the smell of rust. The chestnut mare with a chain that had no business in the ground. The foal small as unanswered prayer. He didn't dress it up, and he didn't shake. He just set it down between them. Maya held the story with both hands and did not let any of it spill. You gave her water, she said. A small lift in her voice, like a door unlatched. What I had. Maya opened her sketchbook. A few lines, and there it was already. The slope of a neck, the lift of a wild eye, the curve of a calf folded under. She shaded the chain, but left the links unfinished, as if refusal itself could file metal smooth. You're going back, she said. Not a question. I promised, Cal answered. The word hung in the kitchen with the smell of peaches and dust and rain that hadn't arrived yet. They ate at the counter. 2 sandwiches, 2 glasses of water, the clink of ice, like distant bells. Cal sorted the mail again. The mortgage refinance envelope wore its numbers like badges. The bank wanted a meeting and a timeline and a good reason to believe. Cal had reasons, but none the bank would value. He folded the letter clean and slid it beneath the salt shaker. In the corner, the answering machine stuttered out a voice. Sheriff Avery reminding folks the county fairgrounds had space for livestock if the monsoon flooded low fields, a feed store pitch about farm equipment financing, and a soft, tired message from Mrs. Ortega, whose heifer had calved breech last winter and lived because a stranger showed up in the dark with a rope and the right words. That was you, Maya said, quiet as a thought. The light eased toward evening. Cal pulled the old tarp from the shed and checked the coils of rope, the come-along, the rusted pulleys he'd oiled 100 times. He filled 2 clean 5-gallon jugs at the spigot, lifted them into the truck, and strapped them down like passengers. When he tested the beam of the big flashlight, a column of pale dust lit and rose in the shed like a ghost going home. He set a small bucket, a soft brush, a bag of plain oats. Just in case, he said to the air. From the nail on the wall, he took the canvas medical pouch Lainey had labeled back when Hope wore her handwriting. Gauze, iodine, a roll of vet wrap, the blunt scissors that had cut twine, and birthdays and tears. On the porch, the wind moved the chimes Lainey had made from spoons. Their music was thin and brave. Storm clouds slouched over the mesas, all show and no rain yet. Maya stood beside him, with her hair pulled into a knot that never held. If she kicks? She asked. She won't, he said, though the truth wore different shoes. She looked at me like she'd already spent all her fear. He glanced down at his hands. They were not young hands, and not old, but the kind that had learned to carry eggs and engines with the same respect. I'll go gentle, he added, because he'd learned there are words you say for the person who hears them, and words you say to instruct your bones. They drove out just before sundown, the Ford grumbling approval as if it recognized the road and the reason. Maya rolled the window down and let the desert come in. Sage and creosote, and last year's grass ground small by hooves. The hills were the color of faded blood, the sky a slow bruise turning purple. Cal pointed at a long shelf cloud laying like a lid over the west. Monsoon's close. Maya pressed her palm to the wind and felt it push back. They found the breach again by the hush that falls in a place where something wrong has already been done. Cal killed the engine. The quiet after is its own weather. They walked the last stretch, careful over cholla and stones. When the mare saw them, she lifted her head, ears forward, eyes clear in a way they hadn't been that morning. The foal, lighter in coat with a thin white blaze like a promise, wobbled, then tucked itself behind her, smaller than its desire to be brave. "Hey there," Cal said, softer than the wind. He set the water down and stepped no closer than the distance the mare allowed. He let her come to the edges of his presence and measure it. She tasted the air, the shape of him in it, then moved one hoof closer and stopped. Cal dipped the hat again, brim filling, and held it at knee level, palm open, the way you offer a handshake to a stranger you hope will teach you your own name. She drank slower this time, careful, pausing to breathe. When she finished, she touched the rim once with the velvet of her lip, then turned her head to the foal, who pressed against her, and sighed as if learning how. Maya crouched, pencil moving. No chain now, no force, just the length of a neck and the line of trust drawing itself without breaking. "Her name's Solana," she said quietly, like sharing the location of a spring. The mare flicked an ear. Names are either a net or a bridge. This one felt like the latter. "Okay, Solana," Cal murmured. "Let's see what we can do." He inspected the cedar stake. Whoever set it had used a sledge and a certain kind of meanness. The chain had bit deep, but the soil around the base showed a faint looseness, where the day's heat had worked and the morning's water had seeped. Cal looped the come-along to a mesquite root, hooked the chain a notch above the ground, and tested the slack. The first pull made a noise like a jar breaking in another room. The mare shivered, but didn't bolt. Cal talked to her nonsense, weather talk, idle talk, kitchen talk, because the tone matters more than the words when fear is a language you're trying to retire. Maya stood to the side, steady as a fence post, every muscle listening. The second pull brought the stake a finger's width out of the earth, enough for Cal to see the raw wood and smell the wet in the dirt's throat. He stopped, let the quiet sit, then gave a third, shorter tug. The stake groaned, then yielded. Not all at once, just enough to confess it wasn't a god, only wood. He pressed his boot to the loosened base, lifted the chain to take the weight off Solana's neck, and looked to her eye for permission he didn't know how to ask. She stared back, unblinking, and did nothing foolish. Courage wears many faces. Tonight, it wore patience. Darkness gathered, the kind that smells like rain and old iron. Maya held the flashlight low so the shadows went up instead of forward. Cal eased the stake free. The chain spilled slack, a snake deciding against a fight. He didn't cut it. He needed something to guide her with until safety had a shape. But he wrapped the worst of it in an old towel so metal wouldn't kiss skin anymore. "That's all for tonight," he said, voice shaking exactly once, the way a bell does when it knows it has been heard. They gave the foal a minute more to nurse, then stepped back together, father and daughter like bookends nobody dusts. The sky finally let go a few fat drops that hit the dirt like punctuation. Cal loaded the empty jugs, the coiled rope, the tool that had found its rightful job. Maya shut the truck door softly, the way you close a sleeping room. On the drive home, the wipers squeaked against glass that barely needed them. In the mirror, Cal watched the hill recede until it looked like any other hill. It wasn't. He felt that in the long bones. Beside him, Maya traced a ribbon of fog on the window and wrote one word that faded as quickly as it formed. Stay. He didn't see it, but he felt the shape of it settling between them like a truce. At a crossroad, a pickup barreled past too fast, throwing washboard dust and a glance. Cal recognized the driver in the flash of a billboard. Trent Malloy, jaw set like a padlock. The truck's taillights winked out over the ridge. At home, the air smelled different, like a field taking its first drink. They stacked the tools by the door, left their shoes in a pair like a memory that wants to last. Cal rinsed his hands at the sink, the water running brown at first, then pale, then almost clear. Maya stood with her sketchbook open to the page where Solana had no chain. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," he agreed. Before bed, Cal stopped at the window with Laney's photo. The glass threw back a soft copy of his face, older than he remembered, calmer than he deserved. He slid the legal assistance flyer under the phone, pinned the auto insurance renewal with a magnet shaped like a horseshoe, and left the veterinary services postcard within reach. A house is made of decisions others can't see. He turned off the lamp, and the room kept its shape in the blue settle of night. He lay awake a long time, listening to rain that didn't quite arrive, and to the quiet that did. When sleep finally came, it was the kind that doesn't ask permission. In it, he stood on the north slope with the chain gone and the earth closing its wound around an empty hole. The foal nosed his hand. The mare looked past him toward a line of dark hills, ears pricked to some music he couldn't hear yet. He woke with the taste of it on his tongue, metal given back to silence, and the certainty that morning would ask for more than courage. It would ask for gentleness you could measure. He set the alarm for before dawn. Somewhere out in the black, a train blew low and lonesome. Cal answered under his breath, a sound not quite a prayer, not quite a promise, but enough to carry. "I'll be there." The sun over Rio Mora rose merciless, a white disk burning through the thin clouds left by night's almost rain. Cal Bennett was already up, boots crunching on gravel, a coffee mug cooling fast in his hand. Steam drifted over the rim like smoke from something that had finally quit fighting. The air smelled of wet dust and sage, sharp enough to make a man remember he was alive. He checked the truck. 2 fresh water jugs, the veterinary pouch, a roll of clean towels, a bag of oats. The solar panel flyer still sat on the dashboard where he'd left it. He smiled at the promise of energy independence and thought of how people would sell hope in any form. He took the back road north before the wind rose, tires humming over the washboard ruts. At every bend, the mesas flared copper and pink, and the sky looked too wide for one man's troubles. When he reached the breach in the fence, he found Solana standing. The chain hung looser now, the towel he'd wrapped still holding. The foal, Juniper, Maya had called him, was on its feet, wobbly but determined, nose buried in his mother's flank. Cal let the truck idle, engine a low murmur to announce his return. He spoke softly through the window. "Morning, girl. You kept your promise." He poured water into the hat again, slower this time, and watched her drink in careful gulps. The foal's muzzle dripped with curiosity. Cal wet his fingers and let the little one lick the drops. It was clumsy, warm, and alive in a way that made his chest ache. He'd seen enough lifeless things to know the worth of movement. He worked the soil around the cedar hole, deepening it so the air could dry what lay beneath. With every shovel of dirt, the smell of iron weakened. The chain links clanked as Solana shifted, a dull sound now, not cruel, but tired. Cal whispered to her about weather and irrigation, about crop insurance, about nothing that mattered except his voice, staying calm. The mare's ears twitched at his words. The foal blinked at him as if he were learning a new kind of creature. By midday, the heat grew heavy enough to blur the horizon. He stepped back to rest, wiping sweat from his neck. Across the field, a black truck rolled slow, Trent Malloy's rig, unmistakable in its arrogance. Cal froze, watching dust plumes trail behind it. The truck didn't stop. It only lingered at the ridge, long enough for a man to mark his territory. Then it vanished toward the main road. Cal exhaled through his teeth. He'd known this peace was borrowed time. When he turned back, Solana had lowered her head toward him, eyes softer than he'd yet seen. He felt something shift, like the world admitting a secret. He reached out and brushed his knuckles lightly along her cheek. The skin twitched once, then stilled. That single touch felt like forgiveness given both ways. He fed her handfuls of oats mixed with bits of hay from the truck bed. The sound of chewing filled the dry air. Juniper nosed his boot, demanding attention, and Cal laughed, a short, rusty sound that startled even him. The foal flinched, then leaned closer, reassured by tone more than sense. He didn't notice the time slipping past until the shadows shortened to nothing. Sweat carved lines down his shirt. The taste of salt and rust mixed on his tongue. He sat in the truck's shade and watched Solana doze, one leg cocked, her foal tucked against her belly. In that stillness he felt the quiet pulse of gratitude, a rhythm older than speech. The wind changed in the afternoon. A new scent drifted. Wet clay, mesquite smoke, ozone. Thunderheads were forming over the western hills. Cal thought about driving back, then saw the mare lift her head and look east, nostrils wide, as if reading something written in the air. "All right," he said. "We'll go." The ride home was slow. He kept glancing at the mirror, half expecting dust to rise behind him, but the road stayed empty. When the farm finally came into view, Maya was sitting on the porch steps, sketchbook open, hair pulled loose by the wind. She looked up, shading her eyes. "You did it," she said before he'd even climbed out. "Not yet," he answered, "but she's standing." Maya smiled, the kind that made him see her mother's face for a blink, and then lose it again. She showed him the page she'd drawn. Solana free of chains, Juniper chasing a swallowtail through tall grass. Cal traced the pencil marks with a thumb. "You're seeing what's coming," he said. "Someone has to." They ate supper outside while the horizon darkened to violet. Lightning stitched silent lines over the mesas. The first cool breeze in weeks rolled across the fields, stirring the peppers, rattling the wind chimes. For the first time since the storm that had taken Laney, Cal felt the air carry something besides grief. It carried promise, like the low hum before rain. Later, when Maya had gone inside, Cal stayed on the porch. He opened the life insurance envelope he'd ignored for months and read the fine print under the dim porch light. It spoke of protection, continuity, legacy. He smiled at the irony. Sometimes protection meant cutting a chain. Continuity meant teaching a scared creature to trust again. He folded the paper neatly and slid it back into its envelope. In the dark distance, thunder rolled once, deep and slow. Cal imagined Solana and the foal under a patch of starlight, the chain slack, their breaths steady. Tomorrow he would bring help. Maybe the vet, maybe Alana Ruiz from the next county over. He'd find a way to make the law see reason. He stood, stretching the stiffness from his back. The wind had turned cooler. Somewhere beyond the fields, a coyote barked twice, then fell silent. Cal answered with a low whistle, part habit, part prayer. He thought of Solana's steady eyes and the way the foal had leaned into his leg. In a world built on ownership, that moment had felt like mercy wearing flesh. He went inside, left the door unlatched for the breeze, and let the dark settle where light had once refused to. On the kitchen table, the sketchbook lay open to the drawing of the chestnut mare. The pencil lines caught the lamplight, alive with motion. Cal touched the page as though confirming she was real. Outside, thunder cracked again, and rain began to whisper against the roof. Soft, deliberate, forgiving. The storm came fast. One moment the horizon glowed with late-day copper. The next it folded in on itself, clouds tumbling like black wool. Cal Bennett drove the truck hard along the ridge, the wipers fighting dust more than rain. Lightning stitched white through the dark, and the wind carried the raw tang of ozone and sage. He had promised he'd come back before night, and promises, he'd learned, were anchors, useless unless they held in rough weather. When he reached the north slope, the air was thick enough to taste. The mare stood where he'd left her, the chain. Half buried in mud now, the foal pressed tight to her side. The storm's first drops were wide and warm, bursting against the dust like small hearts breaking open. "Easy, girl," he called, his voice barely more than breath. Solana lifted her head. Even through the rising wind, he saw the white of her eye. She wasn't afraid, just alert, as if measuring whether he still meant what he said yesterday. Cal pulled the truck as close as he dared and left the engine running for light. He slipped on the old leather gloves, the ones Lainey had oiled for him the spring before she died, and checked the knot of chain. The ground had softened from the first rain. What had been stubborn earth now gave under his boot. "We're gonna fix this," he said. The mare shifted, her hooves splashing in shallow water. Thunder cracked out overhead, scattering a flock of doves from the ridge. He looped the rope around the cedar post again, set the come-along, and leaned into the pull. The storm wrapped around them like a living thing. Each time he tightened the ratchet, the chain screamed and the post groaned but stayed. The rain turned harder. It hissed off the truck's hood, streamed down his neck. Juniper, the foal, bleated softly, a sound more question than fear. Cal kept talking, nonsense mostly, stories about the harvest, about farm equipment loans that never came through, about how sometimes a man fixes what's in front of him because fixing the past isn't an option. A bolt of lightning split the sky, close enough to make the ground shudder. The cedar shivered, then cracked along a hidden vein. Cal felt the give and pulled once more, muscles burning. With a sound like the world exhaling, the post tore free, flinging wet dirt into the air. The mare stumbled forward, nearly toppling him. For an instant everything was motion, hooves, mud, rain, breath, and then stillness. The chain hung slack from her neck, heavy but harmless. He dropped to one knee, chest heaving, staring at the miracle of an ordinary thing undone. Solana's flanks trembled, her chestnut coat slick with rain and light. She blinked at him through the downpour, the fear gone, replaced by something quieter. Awareness, gratitude, maybe even trust. Cal reached up and rested a hand against her shoulder. "That's it," he whispered. "You're free enough for now." The foal nosed at his sleeve, mouth warm, hungry for reassurance. Cal laughed under his breath. "You too, kid." The rain thickened until it blurred everything into watercolor. Horse, man, truck, sky. He stripped the towel from the chain and looped the metal loosely over his arm, leading Solana toward the shelter of a low stand of juniper trees. There they waited, the three of them, as the storm poured its weight over the world. When the thunder eased, Cal tied the loosened chain to a fallen branch just to keep Solana near. She grazed nervously at the fresh shoots, while Juniper found the courage to step a few feet away, kicking at puddles. The smell of wet earth filled the hollow, clean and metallic. Cal leaned against the truck door, shaking out his arms. His heart wouldn't slow, not from fear, but from the fierce, simple joy of seeing her move without pain. Headlights cut through the rain behind him, two sharp eyes gliding down the ridge road. A black pickup, big tires, too fast for the weather. Malloy. Even from a distance, Cal could feel the arrogance in the way the truck climbed and stopped, its beams swallowing everything they touched. The window rolled down, a silhouette leaned out. "Evenin', Bennett," the voice drawled, half mocking. "You got yourself a wild one there." Cal's gut tightened. "She's not yours," he said. "That right? Looks like she's wearing my chain." The words slid through the rain like oil on water. "It's a chain, not a brand." Malloy laughed once, short and ugly. "You just remember, farmer, wild horses belong to the Bureau, not to dreamers playin' hero." The truck's engine revved, tires spitting gravel. And then it was gone. Tail lights swallowed by the storm. Cal stood in the dark long after the sound faded. The rain softened again to drizzle. He could taste grit in his teeth and the copper of fear on his tongue. He turned back to Solana, who had watched the exchange without flinching. "Don't worry," he said quietly. "He talks bigger than he acts." Still, the warning dug deep. The law and men like Malloy were the same breed. They both came when you least needed them. He decided to move the horses before dawn. The old cattle shed near the south orchard would serve. Its roof still held, and there was hay from last season. He cut the rest of the chain, leaving only a loop like a loose necklace until he could file the edges smooth. Solana followed him without tugging. Juniper tottering behind, tail flicking rain. Their reflections shimmered in every puddle, three figures stitched together by chance and a promise. At the farm gate, the storm broke completely. The sky cracked open, releasing a curtain of rain that turned the world silver. Cal guided them into the orchard, the scent of apples rising from the soaked earth. Lightning flashed again, revealing the old shed, half hidden among twisted trunks. He led Solana inside, spread hay across the floor, and rubbed her neck until her breathing slowed. The foal curled beside her, eyes half closed. Content. Cal sank onto a hay bale, soaked through, bones humming from exhaustion. The thunder moved east, leaving only the steady percussion of rain on tin. He watched the mare lower her head, watched the foal twitch in sleep, and felt something in his chest unclench. Freedom wasn't the noise of chains breaking. It was this silence after, when life decided to keep going. He pulled the blanket from the truck and laid it over his shoulders, the smell of oil and sweat and rain mingling into something honest. Through the shed's cracked door, he could see the last threads of lightning fading into the desert. Tomorrow would bring questions. From Maya, from the sheriff, maybe from the bureau. But tonight belonged to this small, breathing peace. He took a long breath and whispered into the dark. "We made it, girl." Solana's ear flicked. Juniper stirred, then settled again. Outside, the orchard steamed as the rain met warm soil. Cal closed his eyes, and the rhythm of their breathing folded into his own. Steady, deliberate, certain. Dawn came thin and pale, seeping through cracks in the tin roof of the old cattle shed. Cal Bennett woke to the sound of breathing, not his own, but deeper, steadier. Solana stood at the far end, her chestnut coat catching the first threads of morning light, like burning copper. Juniper slept in a small heap at her feet, one ear twitching with each dream. The smell of hay and wet earth filled the air, layered with something quieter, almost holy, the scent of safety hard won. Cal rose stiffly from the hay bale. His body ached in every joint, but the ache felt earned. He stepped softly to the mare, checked the cut on her neck. The flesh was swollen but clean. The blood had dried to a dark halo around the wound. She blinked slowly. Calm. No longer the trembling creature chained to the dirt. He whispered, "You did good, girl." Outside, the land was washed new. The storm had left the air heavy and cool, the mesas wrapped in thin fog. Puddles mirrored the orchard trees, each reflection trembling with the softest wind. The scent of apples mixed with the wet iron tang of the tools Cal had dropped by the door. He walked to the pump and worked the handle until clear water surged from the spout. It splashed cold over his hands, chasing the last of sleep away. By the time he reached the house, Maya was already up. She stood barefoot on the porch, sketchbook open on her knees, hair tangled from the night. When she saw him, her face lit with relief and disbelief all at once. "You really brought them back," she said. "They needed shelter. Storm would have finished them out there." Maya put the pencil behind her ear. "Mom would have done the same." Her voice carried no weight of comparison, only fact. That quiet truth landed somewhere deep inside Cal, like a stone sinking into still water. He poured coffee for them both, the cheap kind that promised morning energy in bold letters on the can. They drank it black, watching the day take shape. Across the fields, a hawk rode a column of air, and the barn glimmered faintly in the light. Cal told her about Malloy, the truck in the rain, the words thrown like bait. Maya's mouth tightened. "He's going to come back, isn't he?" "Probably," Cal said. "But now she's not chained. That's something." After breakfast, they walked to the shed together. The ground still held their footprints from the night before, half filled with rain. Inside, Solana lifted her head, ears flicking toward Maya. Juniper scrambled to his feet and stretched his spindly legs, a newborn testing the idea of confidence. Maya crouched low, her movements slow, palms open. "Hey there, sunshine," she murmured. The mare's nostrils flared once, twice, then she leaned forward, pressing her warm muzzle into the girl's outstretched hand. Cal felt his throat close. It had taken months for Maya to speak to anyone but him after Laney's death, and now here she was, whispering to a horse as if she'd been waiting for this exact moment all along. "She trusts you," he said. "She trusts us," Maya corrected. They worked quietly the rest of the morning. Cal spread fresh straw, hammered a loose hinge, hung a lantern near the door. The place began to look less like a hiding spot and more like a promise. He called Dr. Alana Ruiz from the veterinary card on the table. She answered on the second ring, her voice brisk and warm. "You're the Bennett from the River Flats, right? Heard you've got yourself a rescue?" "Two, technically," he said. "One's still small enough to fit in a dream." Alana chuckled. "I can be there by afternoon. Keep them calm, and don't feed grain until I've checked digestion. Foals can colic easy." "Understood." The hours passed slow and golden. Maya fetched buckets of water, humming under her breath. Solana watched her every move, tail swishing rhythmically. Juniper, all legs and enthusiasm, tested the edges of the barn, sniffing everything new. When a beam of light slid through the open door, he tried to chase it, stumbling into his own shadow. Maya laughed, a sound Cal hadn't heard in too long. It cracked something open in him that no amount of silence had managed to mend. By mid-afternoon, the low rumble of an approaching engine stirred the quiet. Cal stepped outside, half expecting Malloy's black truck. Instead, a tan SUV stopped by the gate. Dr. Alana Ruiz climbed out, jeans tucked into boots, her dark hair braided tight. She carried a worn leather case and the calm authority of someone used to storms of all kinds. Inside the shed, she crouched beside Solana, murmuring soft Spanish phrases that sounded like lullabies. The mare didn't flinch as Alana cleaned the wound and applied ointment. "She's tough," the vet said, standing, "but dehydrated. You did right bringing her in." She checked the foal next, running her fingers along the colt's ribs. "He's lucky. Another half day in that heat." She didn't finish. Cal nodded. "They were chained near the fence line. Malloy's doing, I'd bet." Alana's mouth tightened. "Wouldn't surprise me. He's been warned before." She snapped the case shut. "Keep them here a few days. I'll file a preliminary report. Call it emergency care. That'll buy us time if anyone comes asking." When she left, the sun had begun to drop, laying gold light across the orchard. Maya leaned against the doorway, watching Solana nibble at hay. "She looks different already," she said. "Freedom changes posture," Cal replied. Night came slow. Cal left the lantern burning low in the barn, a small circle of light in the dark field. From the porch, he could see it glowing like a second moon. Maya had fallen asleep on the couch, sketchbook open beside her. The last page showed Solana's eye, drawn large and unchained. Cal sat a while, letting the cool wind slide through the screens. Somewhere out beyond the rows of apple trees, the world creaked toward another test he couldn't yet see. But for the moment, there was peace. Thin, but real. He could hear the horses shifting in the straw, their quiet breathing mixing with the hum of night insects. The barn light swayed gently, like someone keeping watch. He took one last sip of coffee gone cold, and whispered toward the dark, "Stay safe, girl." Out in the shed, Solana flicked an ear, as if the message had arrived. The lantern's glow caught the copper sheen of her coat, turning her into something halfway between fire and forgiveness. By the end of the week, the sky over Rio Mora turned strange. Too bright in the morning, too still by noon. The kind of stillness that made dogs restless and farmers uneasy. Cal Bennett felt it in the soles of his boots as he worked the pump by the orchard. The air carried more dust than breeze, and somewhere beyond the ridge, thunder muttered like a rumor not yet sure of itself. The barn had become the heart of the farm. Every morning, Cal opened the doors and found Solana waiting, her chestnut coat shimmering in the half-light, Juniper prancing around her like the thought of freedom made flesh. Maya had built a small pen behind the barn, lining it with fallen branches and rope. She painted a wooden sign, Solana and Juniper's Place, and hung it crooked above the gate. Cal didn't correct her. Some mistakes, he'd learned, were worth keeping. Dr. Alana Ruiz returned mid-morning with fresh bandages and a truck bed full of feed. She checked Solana's neck, whistled softly. "Healing better than expected," she said. "Whatever you're doing, keep it up." "Mostly just letting her breathe," Cal answered. Alana smiled. "That's more medicine than people realize." She scribbled notes on a clipboard, then glanced toward the dusty horizon. "You heard about the drought warnings? County wants everyone ready for water rations." Cal sighed. "Another dry spell will kill the lower field. I'll manage." He didn't say how close the bank already had him to the edge. Alana seemed to sense it anyway. She touched the brim of her hat. "If you need a hand, call." When she left, the dust was already rolling low across the flats. Maya tied a scarf over her mouth and squinted toward the east. "Feels like the world's holding its breath," she said. "That's usually when trouble rides in," Cal muttered. By afternoon, the wind came hard from the south, lifting the topsoil into two orange ghosts that twisted over the orchard. The barn groaned under the pressure, the door chains rattling like an echo of Solana's old captivity. Cal hurried to close the shutters, while Maya soothed the mare with a low hum that sounded almost like a hymn. The foal pressed against his mother's side, eyes wide. Inside the wind's roar, they barely heard the engine. A black truck crawled up the dirt road and stopped by the gate. Malloy stepped out, his hat low, his grin sharp as barbed wire. "Evenin', Bennett," he called, voice riding the gusts. "Heard you been collectin' what's not yours." Cal walked out slow, dust rising around his boots. "If you mean the mare you left to die, she's alive because someone cared enough to try." Malloy leaned against the fence, eyes glinting. "Wild horses belong to the Bureau. You can't play savior, farmer. There's rules." "Then where were those rules when you chained her?" The smile faltered. "You talk a lot for a man who owes the bank." Cal's fists clenched at his sides. "I pay my debts, maybe not in cash, but in decency." Malloy spat into the dust. "Decency won't keep that land." He pointed toward the barn. "I'll be back with papers. You'll hand her over, or the sheriff will." He turned, boots grinding gravel, and drove off in a storm of orange wind. Cal watched the dust swallow the truck, feeling the old ache rise in his scarred shoulder. Maya came beside him, face pale. "What if he really has papers?" "Then we show him what paper can't hold," Cal said quietly. He rested a hand on her shoulder, and for a heartbeat she leaned into it. The first time in months. That night, the storm broke. Not rain, just wind and lightning. The air pulsed with electricity. Solana refused the stall, pacing the pen instead, head high, sensing danger. Cal stayed with her, coat pulled tight, flashlight beam slicing through the dark. "Easy," he said. "You're safe now." But even as he said it, he wasn't sure. Maya appeared in the doorway, her flashlight trembling. "Dad, look!" She pointed toward the ridge. 3 faint lights moved through the dust, headlamps, creeping slow. Cal's pulse thudded. "Inside, now." He doused the lantern, pulling the barn door half shut. They waited. breath and thunder tangled in the same rhythm. The lights paused near the old fence line, then faded. Only the wind remained, clawing at the roof like a restless animal. Hours later, when the storm finally sagged into silence, Cal sat on a hay bale, watching Solana sleep. Her sides rose and fell with the calm of a creature who trusted again. He envied that kind of peace. He brushed a strand of straw from her mane and whispered, "You've carried your chains long enough. Let me carry the rest." Outside, the dust began to settle. The stars returned one by one, fragile as promises. In their light, Cal saw Maya curled in the straw beside Juniper, both of them asleep, both safe for now. He smiled despite the weight pressing on him. For the first time in years, his world, broken, battered, rebuilt, had something worth defending. When dawn came, it brought a quiet so clean it felt rehearsed. The orchard shimmered silver with dew. Cal stepped outside and saw hoof prints leading toward the ridge. Fresh, deep, but not running. Just walking, calm and certain. He followed them with his eyes until they disappeared into the brightness. He knew Malloy would return, maybe with men, maybe with law. But he also knew this land had already chosen its side. Freedom had a way of planting roots where mercy took hold. The next morning broke with the heavy silence that follows a storm, the kind that makes even birds reconsider their songs. Cal Bennett stepped onto the porch with his coffee and listened. The world felt too still. No wind, no cicadas, not even the distant hum of the highway. Only the creak of the barn door shifting on its hinges. Maya came out barefoot, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "They're quiet," she said. "They're watching," Cal replied. He knew the difference. Horses had their own kind of weather sense. When something was wrong, they breathed differently. Inside the barn, Solana stood at the stall gate, ears forward, muscles coiled. Juniper hid beneath her neck, his small body trembling. Cal stroked her shoulder, feeling the warmth under her chestnut coat. "Easy, girl. Nobody's here." But even as he said it, he knew he was lying to them both. By mid-morning, the wind returned, hot and dry. Dust spun over the fields in slow spirals. Cal spent the next hours tightening latches, checking fence posts, and pretending everything was normal. Maya sketched on the porch, glancing at him now and then, as if measuring how much worry to borrow. Near noon, a pair of trucks appeared on the horizon. One bore the county seal, the other was black and unmarked. Cal's stomach tightened. The first belonged to Sheriff Cole Avery, the kind of man who still tipped his hat in greeting. The second could only mean trouble. When they pulled up to the gate, Cal wiped his hands on his jeans and walked out to meet them. Avery climbed from his truck first. "Mornin', Cal," he said, voice steady, eyes tired. "Mornin', Sheriff." The driver of the black truck followed, a clean-shaven man in a tan jacket, holding a clipboard thick with papers. Malloy climbed out behind him, smirking. "Told you he had her," Malloy said. The man with the clipboard introduced himself as Dennis Cray, Bureau of Land Management. He flipped through his documents with the detached calm of a man whose work never got dirt under its nails. "Mr. Bennett, we've received a complaint regarding the unlawful possession of federally protected Mustangs." Cal kept his voice low. "She was dying when I found her. If I hadn't stepped in, there'd be 2 carcasses out there instead of 2 living creatures." Cray barely looked up. "Intentions don't erase procedure." "Procedure didn't show up in time." Malloy laughed, a sound too sharp for daylight. You can argue that all day, but law's law. That mare's mine by right of capture. She's no one's property, Maya said from the porch, voice shaking but clear. Everyone turned. She stood clutching her sketchbook to her chest like a shield. You chained her, and she still didn't hate you. That's more forgiveness than you deserve. Malloy's grin faltered. Kid ought to learn when to keep quiet. Enough, Avery said, stepping between them. His voice carried the weight of the county behind it. Nobody's taking anything until I see what's what. He looked at Cal. You got proof of how you found her? Cal nodded. Pictures, the chain, the stake, even the coordinates. He fetched his phone from the kitchen and showed the photos. Avery studied them, jaw tightening. Looks like cruelty to me, he said. Cray frowned, uncertainty creasing his professional calm. We'll need verification. I'll file an interim hold, no transport of the animals until review. Malloy's face reddened. You can't just... I can, Avery cut in. You want to test it, you can do it from a jail cell for tampering with evidence. The wind gusted, kicking dust across the yard. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Cray cleared his throat. We'll reconvene tomorrow. Mr. Bennett, keep the animals contained and unharmed. Sheriff, I'll send the paperwork by evening. They drove off, Malloy's engine roaring louder than needed, throwing gravel against the fence. The noise lingered even after the trucks vanished down the road. Cal stood motionless until the last trace of dust settled. Maya walked up beside him. You think he'll come back tonight? Men like Malloy don't sleep when they're told no. That evening, Cal fixed the outer locks on the barn, added a second chain, and placed an old floodlight by the door. The air tasted like iron again, the scent that always came before rain or trouble. Solana paced the stall, restless. Juniper pressed close to her flank, eyes reflecting the lantern's glow like twin embers. When the first flash of lightning crawled across the sky, Maya was in the barn doorway, refusing to go inside. If he comes, we'll hear the truck, she said. Cal didn't argue. They sat together on overturned buckets, listening to thunder creep closer. Each rumble rolled through his chest like a question he couldn't answer. Hours passed. Wind lashed the apple trees. The floodlight swung in its bracket. Cal fought sleep, until the barn seemed to breathe around him. Wood, rain, and the slow rhythm of horses shifting their weight. A metallic clang jolted him awake. He grabbed the flashlight and stepped outside. The gate hung open, chain sliced clean. Tire tracks cut through the mud, leading toward the creek road. For one stunned second, his mind refused the truth. Then Maya screamed from inside the barn. Juniper's gone! Cal ran into the storm, flashlight beam shaking. Beyond the orchard, faint hoofprints dotted the wet ground, small, desperate, leading toward the ridge. Thunder rolled overhead, the sky flashing white. Malloy! He shouted into the wind, but only the echo answered. He followed the tracks until the mud swallowed them. The rain turned to sheets, stinging his face. Somewhere in the chaos, Solana neighed, a sound that cut through everything, raw and wild. She broke past him, chestnut body gleaming in the lightning, galloping toward the dark line of hills. Maya, stay back, Cal yelled, but she was already behind him, soaked and crying. He took him, Dad! He took Juniper! Cal grabbed her shoulders. Get inside, call Avery, tell him what happened. She hesitated, trembling. What about you? I'll bring them home. And then he was gone, chasing the sound of thunder that wasn't in the clouds anymore but pounding in his veins, echoing off the canyon walls. The rain blurred the world into streaks of copper and black. Each flash of lightning showed Solana ahead of him, climbing the ridge, unstoppable. Cal followed, heart hammering, lungs burning, knowing only one thing. Mercy wasn't passive. It ran headlong into danger, even when it had no guarantee of winning. Rain blurred the desert into motionless silver. Cal Bennett's boots pounded against mud that tried to swallow him whole. The beam of his flashlight cut a narrow path through the storm, but the world beyond it was all noise, wind, thunder, the far-off cry of a mare who refused to stop. Each time Solana's call echoed, it pulled him forward like a rope tied to his chest. Somewhere ahead, Juniper was out there, small, terrified, and in the hands of a man who didn't understand mercy. Lightning flared, showing the ridgeline in violent white relief. For a second, Cal saw the black truck, taillights flickering like angry eyes as it climbed toward the canyon road. Solana screamed again, her voice raw enough to split the air. She darted ahead of him, hooves slicing through puddles, her chestnut coat lit like fire against the storm. Cal pushed harder, lungs burning. He had no plan, no weapon, only a father's instinct and a debt to repay to life itself. The road narrowed into a wash of clay and gravel. The truck ahead fishtailed, tires spraying arcs of mud. Malloy leaned out the driver's window, shouting something swallowed by the wind. Cal couldn't hear the words, but he knew the tone. Possession. Rage. The same twisted satisfaction that had chained Solana to the earth. Lightning struck a mesquite tree nearby, splitting it in half. The sound rolled through Cal's bones, an ancient drumbeat that made the world small and sharp. Solana reached the edge of the ridge first. She reared high, silhouetted against the flickering sky, and let out a sound that wasn't quite a scream, or a whinny, but something older, something wild. It carried over the roar of rain and wind, and for the first time Cal felt that this wasn't his rescue. It was hers. She had been waiting her whole life to fight for something she loved. The truck skidded to a halt 50 yards ahead, near the dry creek bed. Malloy jumped out, his jacket soaked, his eyes glittering with the kind of fury that grows when control slips away. He yanked at the rope tied to the truck bed. Juniper stumbled in the mud, legs splaying, a small shape against the headlight. "Back off, Bennett," Malloy roared. "This one's mine." "He's nobody's," Cal shouted back, voice hoarse. The words cracked the air like the thunder itself. Malloy's hand went to the rifle slung behind his seat. Solana lunged before Cal could move, charging through the rain, her muscles coiled with years of endurance and defiance. She struck the ground near Malloy, hooves throwing up sprays of mud. The man stumbled backward, tripping over the chain still wrapped around his boot. Juniper cried out, a sound thin as glass. Cal closed the distance, slipping, grabbing for the foal's halter. Malloy swung the rifle up, shouting, "You're done, Bennett!" But thunder answered louder, and lightning split the sky between them. For a heartbeat, the world went white. The rifle fired, a deafening crack swallowed instantly by the storm. The shot went wide, striking a boulder, sparks flying. Solana kicked, her hooves flashing like copper lightning. The rifle flew from Malloy's grip, landing in the creek's shallow water. "Get back!" he yelled, scrambling, but Solana didn't yield. She stood between Cal and Malloy, breath pouring from her like smoke, tail lashing. Juniper pressed against Cal's leg, trembling but alive. "Go home, Malloy," Cal said, his voice low, steady. "Before you do something you can't take back." Malloy's face twisted. "You think you're some kind of hero?" No, Cal replied. Just tired of watching good things die because bad men call it business. For a moment, the two men stared at each other through the rain, one armed with fury, the other with conviction. Then the storm made the choice for them. A flash of lightning struck the ridge above, sending a shower of rocks tumbling down. Malloy cursed, dove for his truck, and peeled away, tires spinning mud. The sound of his engine faded into the dark, leaving only rain and the echo of hooves. Cal knelt beside Juniper, running a hand down the foal's soaked neck. "You're safe now, little one," he whispered. Solana lowered her head, nudging the colt, then brushed her muzzle against Cal's shoulder. He leaned into the touch, breath shaking. "We're all right," he said again, mostly to himself. The rain began to ease, turning from a roar to a whisper. The desert smelled of life, wet sage, copper soil, the faint sweetness of freedom. Cal rose slowly, guiding Juniper back toward the road. Solana followed, head high, her mane plastered dark against her neck. The clouds thinned overhead, revealing patches of stars like windows opening one by one. By the time they reached the orchard, the floodlight by the barn still burned, a beacon in the mist. Maya stood in the doorway, eyes wide, phone still clutched in her hand. When she saw them, mud-streaked, shivering, but together, she ran forward. "Dad!" She threw her arms around him, nearly knocking him backward. Cal laughed once, a broken sound filled with relief. "He's gone," he told her. "Malloy won't be back tonight." Maya knelt by Juniper, running her fingers along the foal's neck. Solana stepped close, touching her nose to the girl's hair. For a moment, all three of them stayed there, breathing the same wet air, hearts beating in the same rhythm. They led the horses inside, laid dry blankets over their backs, and set out buckets of water. The barn smelled of hay and rain, warm and human in its smallness. Cal sank onto a bale, elbows on knees. His body shook with exhaustion, but his mind stayed wide awake. He watched Solana circle once before settling beside Juniper. The two of them pressed so tightly together their shadows merged. Maya sat beside her father, her voice soft. "You could have been killed." "Maybe," he said. "But some things are worth the risk." "Like them?" He looked at the mare and foal, then at her. "Like us," he said. The storm outside began to die, leaving behind the hush that always comes when the land is deciding what to remember. Cal leaned back against the wall, feeling the barn's old timbers steady him. Tomorrow, there would be questions, maybe more men, maybe law. But tonight, there was only this. The smell of rain, the sound of breathing, the fragile truth that mercy can survive even in lightning. He closed his eyes. When the next gust of wind moved through the open window, it carried not fear, but something cleaner, a promise kept. Morning crept across Rio Mora, with the fragile stillness of something that had almost been broken. The storm had washed the world clean. Every leaf and fence post glistened under the newborn sun. Cal Bennett stepped out of the barn, stretching sore shoulders, boots sinking into mud soft as bread dough. Behind him came the sound of steady breathing, Solana's and Juniper's, both asleep at last. The smell of wet hay mixed with smoke from the kitchen chimney, an ordinary smell that felt like grace. He crossed the yard toward the house. Maya was on the porch, hair tangled, a blanket draped over her shoulders. She handed him a mug of coffee so strong it could have walked on its own. You were gone all night, she said quietly. I tried calling the sheriff. He'll know by now, Cal answered. Malloy made enough noise to wake half the county. She studied him. His clothes were stiff with dried mud, his jaw marked by a bruise he hadn't noticed yet. Did he hurt you? Cal shook his head. No, just the weather trying to prove it's still king. He took a slow sip and looked out over the orchard. The apples glittered under a veil of dew, small stars caught in their skins. For a few minutes, father and daughter stood together in silence, the kind that doesn't weigh on you, but holds you upright. By mid-morning, Sheriff Avery's patrol truck rumbled up the drive. The man climbed out, hat already dusted with sunlight. Heard there was trouble last night, he said, not bothering to disguise the concern in his voice. Cal nodded toward the barn. He tried taking the foal. Didn't get far. Avery's gaze followed, eyes narrowing. You got proof? Rifle shell in the creek bed, tire tracks leading south. Cal hesitated. But you'll have to look quick. Rain might have buried half of it. The sheriff nodded. Cray from the Bureau called me this morning. He's reviewing Malloy's permit. Might finally shut him down. He paused. You did right, Cal. But be careful. Men like him don't lose quiet. I'm learning that. Avery tipped his hat, then glanced toward the barn door cracked open. She doing all right? Better than me, Cal admitted. When the sheriff left, Cal spent the rest of the day fixing what the storm had broken. Fences leaned. The south gate hung crooked. Maya helped without needing to be asked. She worked barefoot, her laughter startling the birds back into the trees. Solana watched from the paddock, Juniper trotting circles around her mother, still testing his new legs. The rhythm of chores and the sound of the horses breathing gave the day a heartbeat steady enough to mend by. Late in the afternoon, Dr. Alana Ruiz returned. Her truck kicked up little clouds of dry dust where puddles had already vanished. She stepped out carrying a small kit and the half-smile of someone who knew the cost of surviving. Sheriff told me you had a long night, she said. Could have been worse, Cal replied. She examined Solana carefully, checking the wound on her neck, the muscles along her shoulders. She's healing fast, Alana said. Sometimes fear makes them strong. And the foal, he's bold already. He earned it. Cal hesitated. Malloy fired a shot. Missed, but it was close. Alana's eyes hardened. Then this isn't just about horses anymore. She closed her kit. I'll file a cruelty report myself. You shouldn't stand alone in this. Cal smiled faintly. Seems I'm not. He looked toward Maya, who was leaning on the fence, sketching Solana as the late light burned gold through the orchard. As evening settled, the air changed again. The sweet smell of rain gave way to something sharper. Wood smoke, dry and acrid. Cal frowned. It came from the east ridge, where Malloy's land sat. A column of smoke rose, thin but steady, cutting the sunset in half. Brush fire? Maya asked, following his gaze. Too wet for that, Cal said. More like someone burning what he shouldn't keep. They watched until darkness swallowed the ridge. The smell drifted closer, bitter as old anger. Cal felt it settle in his throat, a warning that didn't need words. That night, he couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house felt like footsteps. Every gust of wind sounded like a truck engine. Around midnight, he stepped outside, the flashlight cutting narrow arcs across the yard. The sky was clear again, full of stars. The barn glowed faintly from within. Maya had left a lantern burning. Cal opened the door quietly. Solana lifted her head, eyes catching the light, calm but alert. Juniper slept curled in straw, chest rising and falling in even time. Cal sat on the ground beside them, leaning against the wooden wall. "You're safe," he whispered, though he wasn't sure who he meant, them or himself. He thought of the ridge fire, of Malloy's truck vanishing into the night. He thought of Avery's warning and Alana's promise to help. He thought of Lainey, her laugh, her hands that once smelled of sage and saddle leather. She had believed mercy was a kind of strength most men forgot how to lift. When sleep finally came, it came in fragments, sound of hooves on dirt, thunder far away, Maya's laughter mixing with Solana's breath. He dreamed of chains melting into sunlight, of the smell of rain giving way to smoke, and of the way the horizon always promised both danger and deliverance. At dawn, he woke to the soft nickering of Solana nudging his sleeve. Her eyes held a question he couldn't answer yet. Beyond the orchard, the first blush of day painted the sky the color of copper and forgiveness. Cal stood, brushed straw from his coat, and whispered, "We're not done, girl. Not yet." The smell of smoke still lingered on the wind, faint but insistent. Somewhere out there, Malloy was burning his mistakes, but ashes had a way of drifting where they weren't wanted. Cal looked toward the east ridge, jaw set, and felt the weight of the day settle on his shoulders. "Let him come," he said to no one, to everyone, to the land itself. "We'll be ready." The morning came with a brightness that didn't feel right, too clear, too sharp. Every color in Rio Mora looked scrubbed raw, the red of the soil, the green of the orchard leaves, the copper of Solana's coat. Even the air had an edge to it, as though the storm had rinsed the world and left it waiting for something to happen. Cal Bennett stood at the fence, one hand resting on a weathered post. Maya was beside him, sketchbook in hand, but she wasn't drawing. She stared toward the east ridge, where the faint thread of smoke still hung against the sky. The night before had left a heaviness between them that no words could smooth. "You think he's done?" she asked quietly. "Men like Malloy don't know how to quit," Cal said. "They only pause long enough to reload." Maya shut her book. "Then we should tell Dr. Ruiz or the sheriff." "I already called Avery at dawn. He said he's coming by after noon." Solana nudged Maya's shoulder, nosing for the apple in her pocket. The girl smiled faintly and offered the fruit. The mare's lips brushed her fingers with surprising gentleness. Cal watched the exchange, reminded again that gentleness was its own kind of defiance. The foal darted around them, all energy and sunlight, kicking up sprays of dust that sparkled like tiny worlds. For a moment, everything looked too peaceful, too fragile to last. The hours passed in uneasy rhythm. Cal worked the orchard while Maya set buckets of water by the barn. The heat climbed, the air thick with the hum of insects. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Around midday, a shadow crossed the field. At first, Cal thought it was a cloud, but then he heard it. The low drone of engines. 2 black trucks, same make as Malloy's, crawling along the dirt road, dust rising in plumes behind them. Maya saw them too. "Dad?" "Inside," Cal said. She hesitated. "What about Solana?" "She stays calm if you do. Go." By the time the trucks reached the gate, Sheriff Avery's old patrol car was already parked there. He stepped out, hand resting near his belt, but not on the gun. The bureau man, Cray, emerged from one of the trucks, papers in hand. Malloy climbed from the other, hat low, grin wider than courage. "This again," Avery muttered. Malloy spread his arms as if greeting old friends. "Just finishing what the law started." "The law didn't start this," Cal said, walking forward. "Cruelty did." Cray cleared his throat. "Mr. Bennett, Mr. Malloy's capture permit is officially suspended pending review. Until then, no removal or transport of any animals from your property." Malloy's grin thinned. "You're making a mistake, Cray. That mare's wild, dangerous. She could kill someone." "Only if provoked," Avery said. "Seems she's been gentler than most men around here." Cal tried to keep his temper steady. "You want to talk about danger? Look east. That fire on your ridge wasn't started by lightning." Malloy's jaw tightened. "You accusing me?" "I'm asking if the smoke was your conscience burning." The words landed harder than he meant them to. For a second, no one spoke. Then the sky cracked with distant thunder, dry thunder, the kind that rolled across the desert without rain. The sound carried for miles, echoing off the mesas. Every man looked up. The clouds above the ridge were black and strange, shaped like smoke more than storm. Cray frowned. "That's not weather," he said. Before anyone could answer, the wind shifted. A thick gust swept through the orchard, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of fire, sharp, alive, coming fast. Cal's stomach dropped. "It's spreading," he said. "The brush is dry again." Avery was already at his radio. "This is Avery at Rio Mora Farm. Fire moving west from Malloy's Ridge. I need engines on standby." Static answered him, broken by distant voices. Malloy backed toward his truck, muttering curses. "That blaze'll eat your place before it touches mine." Cal grabbed his arm. "Then help me stop it." Malloy pulled free. "I look after my own." He climbed into the cab and slammed the door, tires spinning as he turned back toward the ridge. Cray shouted into his phone, but the signal was gone. The wind roared louder, whipping dust into the air. The horizon blurred with smoke. Maya ran from the barn, face pale. "Dad!" He turned. "Get the horses!" They worked fast. Solana resisted at first, nostrils flaring, sensing the danger rolling in. Cal spoke to her in low tones, the same rhythm he'd used the day he found her chained. "It's all right, girl. You've faced worse." She stilled, trembling but listening. Juniper circled her legs, frightened by the heat already licking at the edges of the field. Avery shouted from the gate. "Engines are 20 minutes out! You'll need to move the animals now!" Cal looped the halter around Solana's neck, guiding her toward the open road. Maya led Juniper behind. The air shimmered with heat. Ash began to fall like gray snow. Flames crawled across the ridge, small at first, then taller than the mesquite trees. The sound wasn't just crackling. It was roaring, alive, hungry. They reached the dry wash at the edge of the property, where the wind blew opposite the flames. Cal turned the horses loose in the wide basin. "Stay here," he said, though he knew they didn't need telling. Solana pawed the ground once, eyes fixed on him. "Go," he urged. She hesitated, then trotted deeper into the wash, Juniper bounding after her. By the time Cal and Maya climbed back up the ridge, the fire had reached the orchard. Avery's car lights flashed through the smoke. "They're trying to hold it at the creek line," he shouted over the wind. Cal joined him, helping haul hoses and buckets from the back of the patrol truck. The two men worked side by side, sweat mixing with soot. For an hour, it was chaos. Water hissing, wind howling, the world reduced to smoke and orange light. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the wind shifted again. A stray gust from the north pushed the flames back toward the ridge, consuming the dry brush Malloy had burned the night before. The fire turned on itself, feeding on its own anger. When it was over, the land looked carved from another planet. Black soil, steaming fences, air thick with the smell of ash. The orchard was half gone, the trees nearest the ridge reduced to dark silhouettes, but the barn still stood. Cal sank to his knees, coughing, hands trembling. Maya knelt beside him, her face streaked with soot. "They made it," she whispered. "I saw them down in the wash." He looked up at the sky. The smoke had thinned, revealing a single patch of blue, so vivid it hurt to see. "The sky finally moved," he said softly. "And maybe it took the worst with it." Avery clapped a hand on his shoulder. "You saved more than most could have." Cal shook his head. "I just held on." The sheriff nodded once, then looked toward the charred ridge. "Funny thing about men who start fires, they never expect to get caught in the wind they make." As they walked back toward the barn, the silence grew heavy again. The sky above was colorless now, drained of flame, drained of anger. Solana and Juniper waited by the wash, silhouettes against the cooling dusk. When Cal whistled, the mare lifted her head and began to walk toward him, slow and certain, as though she'd always known the way back. The fire had burned itself out by dawn. When the first thin light crept over Rio Mora, the land looked like it had been through a war it hadn't asked for. Smoke curled from the ground in small, lazy threads. The orchard lay in ruins, rows of trees half-turned to skeletons, leaves gone, trunks blackened but still upright like soldiers refusing to fall. Cal Bennett stood among them, shovel in hand, the earth still warm beneath his boots. His shirt smelled of smoke and fatigue. Maya was a few rows away, gathering unburned fruit in a basket. The apples were singed, but salvageable. Red skins turned darker, as if the fire had kissed them instead of killed them. She worked in silence, sleeves rolled up, face streaked with ash. "Leave the burned ones," Cal said. "We'll use them for feed." Maya looked up, eyes tired, but fierce. "They're still good enough for something." "Yeah," he said softly. "Most things are." By mid-morning, the sheriff returned with volunteers from town. Dr. Alana Ruiz came too, a handkerchief covering her mouth. The smell of wet ash clung to everything. She helped clear debris from around the barn, her boots crunching on charcoal. When she saw Solana and Juniper grazing in the field beyond the creek, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "They made it," she said, relief softening her voice. Cal nodded. "Couldn't stop them from running toward the fire if they'd tried. Guess they trust their own judgment more than ours." Alana smiled faintly. "Smart animals. They always go where the wind tells them." Sheriff Avery joined them, hat in hand, sweat cutting clean lines through the soot on his cheeks. "Malloy's place didn't fare as well," he said. "Fire jumped the ridge. He and his crew made it out. But the corrals are gone. Cray's on his way with federal charges, illegal containment, cruelty, reckless ignition. He's finished." Cal's grip tightened around the shovel handle, but he didn't smile. "Fire evens everything out, doesn't it? Makes greed look the same as dirt." Avery looked at him a long time. "You've got rebuilding ahead of you, Cal. But you also got a whole town offering to help. Folks saw what you did last night. Word spreads." I didn't do it alone, Cal said, glancing toward Maya, who was still collecting apples as if saving them one by one might undo the damage. None of us ever do. By afternoon, the sky had cleared. A strange quiet settled over the land, neither grief nor peace, but something in between. The wind carried the scent of burned wood and ripe fruit. Cal and Alana walked the fence line, checking where the flames had licked through. You could start new rows here, she said. The soil's rich after fire. Harder at first, but it comes back. He studied the blackened ground. Never thought I'd see beauty in ruin. That's because you're looking at it too close, she said. Step back far enough, and you'll see what survived, not what didn't. Maya called to them from the barn. Dad, come see this. They followed her inside. Solana was standing in the middle of the barn, tail swishing lazily, Juniper pressed against her side. The mare's chestnut coat glowed against the dim light filtering through the roof gaps. The scar on her neck healed into a pale crescent. She's better, Maya said proudly. Alana crouched beside the mare, running her fingers along the healed skin. She'll always carry the mark, she said. But that's not weakness. It's proof. Cal ran a hand down Solana's neck. You hear that, girl? Proof you're tougher than the men who tried to break you. Outside, volunteers were clearing fallen branches and burned debris. Someone had set up a pot of coffee on a camping stove. Maya stepped out to help, her laughter carrying faintly through the smoke. Cal leaned against the stall door, exhaustion settling deep into his bones. Alana joined him. You could file ownership papers through the bureau, she said quietly. Officially make them yours. Wouldn't change how you see them, but it'd keep them safe. He thought for a long moment, then shook his head. They don't belong to anyone, not even me. That's noble, she said. It's true, he replied. I didn't free them so I could keep them. I freed them so they could remember what running feels like. Evening came soft and slow. The volunteers left, promising to return with supplies. Avery tipped his hat and drove off, dust rising in the dying light. Cal and Maya sat on the porch steps, sharing slices of half-burned apples. The fruit was warm from the sun, smoky but sweet. Tastes like the world starting over, she said. Maybe it is, he answered. From the field, Solana lifted her head toward the sunset. The fire's black trail ended where the green began, a border drawn by mercy instead of chance. She nickered low, the sound almost like gratitude. Juniper chased her shadow in circles, clumsy and bright. Maya leaned her head against her father's shoulder. Do you think they'll stay? For a while, Cal said, until they... Remember, there's more sky out there. The last of the smoke faded into twilight. The smell of ash gave way to apple blossoms untouched by flame. Somewhere in the dark, a coyote called, not in hunger, but in recognition. Cal closed his eyes and breathed deep. The air was heavy with loss, yes, but also with the clean weight of things reborn. For the first time since winter, he didn't dream of chains or storms or debts. He dreamed of open plains, of the sound of hooves on soft earth, of a mare and her foal running until the horizon stopped trying to contain them. And when he woke, just before dawn, the world was quiet again. The sky hung still, as if waiting for the next chapter to begin. The first morning after the fire that didn't smell of smoke arrived quietly, like a guest knocking before entering. The air was thin and cool, carrying the clean scent of earth turned new. Cal Bennett stepped outside and stood for a long time on the porch, mug of coffee in hand, watching the mist rise from the fields. For weeks, the world had felt like a battle he didn't sign up for. But this morning, it felt like a prayer that someone else had already finished for him. The orchard was half green again. Shoots of new leaves had begun to sprout where the branches still lived. The blackened trunks cast long shadows across the soil, dark reminders of what had passed, but proof of what still held on. He could hear the horses beyond the creek, hooves shifting softly against the damp ground. Maya appeared behind him, barefoot, wrapped in her mother's old quilt. "They're by the ridge," she said. "Solana and Juniper. Been there since dawn." Cal set down his mug and followed her. The path was still rough, scattered with ash, but each step felt lighter. The wind brushed against them, carrying the faint jingle of the mare's halter. When they reached the rise, the sight waiting below caught Cal's breath. Solana and her foal standing in the wide meadow that bordered the wildlands, sunlight spilling over their backs like molten gold. Juniper was stronger now, his coat a lighter shade of chestnut, the white mark on his forehead gleaming like a star. He darted through the grass in circles, kicking up clouds of dust and dandelion seeds. Solana watched him with calm pride, head high, mane rippling in the breeze. The scar on her neck had faded to a pale line, no longer a wound, just a memory. Maya pressed her hand to her chest. "She's showing him the way," she said softly. Cal nodded. "That's what mothers do." They stood in silence for a while, the kind that asked for reverence, not words. Around them, the land hummed with small life returning. Grasshoppers, sparrows, the whisper of wind through sage. Everything felt slower, older, as if time itself had paused to let this moment root into memory. Alana's truck approached in the distance, tires crunching softly along the gravel road. She climbed out with her usual calm, carrying her leather case and a tired smile. "I came to check the wound one last time," she said, then caught sight of the pair in the meadow. "Looks like they're checking on us instead." "They'll be leaving soon," Cal said, "when the next herd passes through." Alana shaded her eyes. "You sure you're ready for that?" He smiled faintly. "It's not about ready, it's about right." She nodded, understanding more than his words said. "I filed the final report," she added. "The Bureau dropped the case. Malloy's charge is stuck. He won't come near you again." "Then it's done," Cal said. "Almost." She touched his arm lightly. "You should know. The vet board asked if you'd consider starting a small rescue program here. They heard what you did. The county's offering a grant." Maya's eyes widened. "A rescue? Like Mom wanted?" Cal hesitated. The thought filled the air like the scent of rain before it falls. Unexpected. Heavy, right. "Maybe," he said, "if you'll help me run it." Maya grinned through tears. "You mean it? I wouldn't have said it out loud if I didn't." They spent the rest of the morning rebuilding a small section of fence by the creek. The rhythm of hammer and nail was almost musical. Steady, forgiving. Solana and Juniper watched from a distance, ears flicking. When the work was done, Maya placed a small wooden sign on the gate. It read, "For the lost, until found." As the sun climbed, a faint tremor moved across the horizon, a ripple of dust, too rhythmic to be wind. Cal squinted. "Look there," he said. Far off, a line of movement shimmered under the heat, a band of wild mustangs, gray and dun-colored, their shapes flickering like ghosts against the mesa. Solana's head rose immediately. She nickered, low and questioning. Juniper answered with a high, bright call that made Maya's throat tighten. Cal unlatched the gate. "Go on, girl," he whispered. "Show him what freedom means." For a long moment, Solana stayed where she was, as if memorizing every detail. The orchard, the barn, the girl with the gentle hands, the man who never stopped showing up. Then she turned toward him. Her eyes caught the light, two pools of amber and forgiveness. She stepped forward, pressed her muzzle against Cal's chest, and breathed once, deep and warm. Maya's hand found her father's. Neither spoke. Then Solana turned and galloped toward the horizon, Juniper at her heels, both bodies burning copper in the sun. They crossed the meadow in a blur of motion and dust, joined by the wild herd that had appeared as if summoned. For a moment, they all ran together. No fences, no chains, just the sound of hooves and the thunder of belonging. When they vanished into the hills, the silence that followed was vast and tender. Cal exhaled, slow, steady. "There they go," he said. "They'll come back," Maya whispered. "When they're ready." He nodded. "Maybe they don't need to. Some things don't have to return to be real." They walked back to the barn. The sign on the gate creaked in the wind, the words catching sunlight. Alana stood by her truck, watching them, a small smile curving her lips. "You did it, Bennett," she said. He looked out over the land, burned, scarred, beautiful. "No," he said quietly. "We just listened when something asked to be saved." The afternoon softened into gold. Birds returned to the orchard, landing on blackened branches that had begun to sprout green. Maya went inside to fetch her sketchbook. When she returned, she showed Cal the final drawing. Solana and Juniper running free beneath a sky with no fences. In the corner, she'd written one line: "Mercy leaves prints only hearts can follow." Cal smiled and closed the book gently. The world felt right-sized again, humble and whole. As the sun dipped behind the mesas, he sat on the porch steps, the same spot where everything had started. The wind carried the faintest echo of hooves from far away, like the land itself remembering their names. And maybe that's what mercy really is. Not a grand gesture, but the quiet choice to stay when it would be easier to walk away. If this story touched your heart, leave a simple 1 in the comments. Just one number to say you still believe in kindness. Don't forget to subscribe and stay with us, because the next story might remind you that even in the hardest places, compassion still finds a way home.